Mi nombre es Andreina y mi cointérprete es Emily y representamos a la Cooperativa de Justicia del Lenguaje Tilde y estaremos ofreciendo interpretación simultánea entre el inglés y el español. My name is Andreina and my co-interpreter is Emily, and we are representing Tilde Language Justice Co-op, and we will be offering simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish, so I will give some bilingual instructions. Este evento será presentado en inglés y puede que hable en español. Si prefiere escuchar la sesión en español, por favor seleccione el canal para español. Si está usando una computadora, haga clic en el botón de interpretación, que también tiene un icono de un mundo. Si está en su teléfono, haga clic en los 3 puntitos y siga las indicaciones en su pantalla. Y no se puede acceder a la interpretación a través de un Chromebook o Linux. Si usted es bilingüe, no necesita escoger un canal de idioma. Today's event will be in English and Spanish. If you prefer to hear the session in English, please select the channel for English. If you're using a computer, click on interpretation, or it's an icon of a little globe. Or if you're connected on your Zoom app on your phone, click on the 3 dots and then follow the instructions on the screen. Interpretation is not available on Chromebook or Linux devices. If you're bilingual, you do not need to choose a language channel and you'll hear the original audio. Por favor, silencie su micrófono cuando no esté hablando y pedimos a todas las personas que hablen despacio, especialmente si están leyendo. Después de los grupos pequeños, tendrán que volver a unirse a su canal de lenguaje. Please mute your mic when you're not speaking. We ask all presenters to speak slowly, especially if you're reading. And after the breakout sessions, you will have to rejoin your preferred language channel. And thank you so much to the organizers for creating this multilingual or bilingual space. Muchas gracias a los organizadores por crear este espacio multilingüe.
So we would love for you to rename yourselves in your Zoom window. If you look for the 3 dots in your window, you will see a prompt, change your name and pronouns. If you're like me, you share Zoom and sometimes my wife's name's there instead of mine. You might want to change that back so the confusion is not there. So if you're on your phone, of course, you can go to the participants and find the rename option there. Again, we'd love for you to rename yourselves in your Zoom window. Look for the 3 dots in your window. You'll see a prompt to change your name and pronouns. If you're on your phone, you can go to the participants area and find the rename option there. So thanks, first of all, to Emily, Andreina from Tilde, who are amazing interpreters for tonight. And we want to welcome everyone here to our town hall on crisis response in the Bull City. I am Xavier Kaysen, one of the co-chairs of the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force. On behalf of my co-chair, Marsha Owen, and on behalf of the passionate members of the Crisis Response Roundtable, we are so glad that you are here representing the voice of our community. We are so excited to hear your point of view, and we're grateful to share this space with the team from the City of Durham's Community Safety Department. Tonight, our agenda is, as you see, welcome and introductions. We have updates from the Community Safety Department with Director Ryan Smith. We'll join with you in conversation in breakout rooms to hear from you how you would like these pilots develop. And then we'll talk about next steps and opportunities to learn more, share more, and stay connected with this work, because it will not end when this town hall ends. Manju?
Hi, I'm Manju Rajendran, and I'm very honored to be part of the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force, our Crisis Care Response Roundtable. And I'm going to share a few agreements that will help us hold space and more deeply listen to each other. We will seek to maximize our learning without hindering anyone else's learning. We will seek opportunities for unity, and we will embrace the possibilities for learning in disagreement. Because we have a lot to do today, we will be flexible, respectful, and speedy as needed to move things forward. And with recognition of each other's experience and possible trauma, particularly around the topics that we'll be talking about, we will slow down and offer kind attention and curiosity towards each other. So if you want to use your little Zoom reactions to give a thumbs up, if you're willing to live by these agreements, we would so appreciate it. 1, we will seek to maximize our learning without hindering anyone else's. We will seek opportunities for unity. We will be respectful, flexible, and speedy, and we will be thoughtful around each other's experience and be kind. Thumbs up if you're feeling it. And I'll pass the mic to Ryan.
Thank you so much. So first, just a warm welcome on behalf of the City of Durham and the Community Safety Department. A welcome to all of those who are taking time out of your evenings to be with us, to learn about where we're at in terms of our planning, and also to spend the better part of this evening helping continue to shape those plans. We're here not just to give an update, but we're here really in partnership with our task force to create a space to be together, to continue to engage with community members on what this work can look like. And so we're really grateful for this space. I want to thank our task force, all the members of our Community Safety and Wellness Task Force who've been at it for now over a year as volunteers, committed to difficult work, committed to centering the voices of our residents in this work, who are working in collaboration. I'm very grateful for the collaboration we have with our task force members, and just for their commitment and love of Durham that we share, and for their volunteerism and public service. So I'm grateful for this space. This space wouldn't exist apart from our collaboration with our task force. Just a little bit about the Community Safety Department, and then we'll dive in. So my name is Ryan Smith, Director of the Community Safety Department. Our department was created this past July as a priority of our city manager with the full support of our city council. We were created as a new department in our public safety portfolio, which means we are a separate department from police and fire and emergency communications, but those departments work together. We seek ways to support one another, and we have a common report with Deputy City Manager Bo Ferguson. Our department was created in part to reimagine additional things that we can do when it comes to creating a shared sense of safety and security in our community, things that may not require law enforcement interaction or interaction with the criminal justice legal system. And a lot of that work, and what we'll focus on tonight, is around how we might respond differently to some calls when people call 911 or have other types of mental or behavioral health or other types of crises. What does it mean to send the right response? Some thank yous. So I'm joined tonight by some of the amazing people on my team that it is my real pleasure to work with every day. People who have a heart for this work, who love Durham, who believe in the mission of this department. We have recently kind of solidified our leadership over kind of managing these crisis response teams. Tonight, we're joined by John Zimmerman, who's our operations administrator, who's worked for 22 years in our 911 center here in Durham. Abena Bediako and Lee Mazur, who are licensed clinical social workers, and our team clinical managers who will be working over our crisis response teams. This team combined has over 50 years of crisis response experience and working in community with individuals to provide the care that they need and want and to meet them where they are. And I'm just really thrilled. Abena is also here tonight. Lee starts on Monday, so is not here with us yet, but really grateful for this. And I just want to thank other members of my team, Dwayne, Abena, Anise, Shireen, Shannon. Just, you know how grateful I am to you for the work that you do every day behind the scenes to make this happen. So thank you. Next slide, please. So my goal is very quickly to give everyone a shared, kind of put everyone on the same level in terms of where we're at and where we're going, so that we can spend most of our time together tonight being in conversation, listening, and thinking about how we can continue to shape what these pilots will look like and what that community engagement will look like as we move forward. So I will be brief, and there's a lot more information on our website that will provide even more detail, and we will continue to be in conversation. But when we leave this, like in 20 minutes, that you'll have a clear sense of the 4 main things that we're going to start doing this summer so that we can spend the rest of our time in conversation together. Let me talk about how we got to these pilots. So there are some core ways that 4 pillars of how we go about doing our work, how we've gotten to this point, and how we will continue even as these pilots launch this summer. So one is we're committed to doing work that is community informed. And that's part of what this space is, of being intentional through town halls, through in-person workshops that we have done, through listening sessions, to really help shape this work in partnership with community members. And that's work that we have done and work that we'll continue to do. We're also committed to work that is highly collaborative. And that means the kind of collaboration that happens with our task force. We've also been really intentional about working closely with other public safety agencies through multi-agency planning team, with police and fire, with EMS, with emergency communications, with local behavioral health providers, and others who have a shared commitment to this work. Next slide, please. We're committed to work that is data-driven, so trying to learn as much as we can about the kind of calls that we're going to respond to, about where they happen, about how often they may ever, and it's very rare that any type of violence is associated with the kind of calls that we're talking about outcomes, about response time, learning as much as we can so we can build a solid foundation for our work. And then we're also committed to doing work that's evidence-based. Some of this is newer. Some of this is going to be about building an evidence base together as a community, but we're also not alone in this work. There are other cities out there doing the things that we're talking about today. And that's really exciting. There are cities today that are sending unarmed responders to behavioral health calls and showing that it can and should be done. There are cities today that are embedding clinicians in their 911 call center and showing the many benefits from that. So as we talk about it today, I'll talk about some examples, but we have taken a lot of time in our first 8 months as a department in all of these ways to build a strong foundation for this work, and we'll continue to do that. Next slide, please. So this is not our first town hall, and maybe some of you joined for our first town hall that we partnered with the task force on. I thought it'd be nice to share some of the things that we heard and that we have tried to center in our work and name. So in our last 2-day town hall, if you think 2 hours is long, I think we got in, I don't know, about 10 or 12 hours together in the fall. We had deep listening over 2 days. And these are just some of the things that emerged that we have tried to take to heart and to center in our work and in the design of these pilots. That what we heard from residents who were gathered was they want new responses that are going to be reliable and predictable. They want to know who's going to show up for what type of call. They want to know how information will be shared about this. They want transparency around it. They want follow through, and they want approaches that will follow up. We also heard, and I think a real central theme is how important it is familiarity with Durham, familiarity with the kinds of calls we're going to respond, familiarity with the communities that we'll be working in, and then empathy and deep listening, that those things are the pillars of trust, and that responding in moments of crisis really requires trust building, and it's something that we're committed to. Next slide, please. We also heard very clearly that the individuals want approaches that center harm reduction, that are trauma informed, that are person-centered, and that responses that honor the dignity of every person in a moment of crisis. And then finally, lots of points and comments around the accessibility and inclusivity of these approaches, responses and responders that are welcoming, that are respectful, that are culturally competent. These are just some of the things. And if you missed our last town hall that we did in partnership with the task force, I know that one of my colleagues will put a chat in so you can go and catch up on that one too. We recorded it all just like we're doing today. Next slide, please. So I want to start by grounding this conversation in the kinds of some of the calls, some real calls that have happened in Durham that these types of responses I'm going to talk about in a minute would respond to. And these are calls that my team has directly observed through ride-alongs with DPD and others. So the first, is a call that comes into our 911 center and it gets coded as a trespass. What happens on this day is a downtown business owner calls about a person who is sleeping in the doorway of their business and will not leave as the business is going to open. On that day, we end up sending 3 officers to the scene to meet with the gentleman, to get the person to move. The person had come here recently from Mecklenburg County, had no place to stay, was unsheltered, was interested in being connected up to housing resources. It was exactly the kind of call that a team of a clinician and a peer support specialist and others would be really great at responding at and meeting the needs of that person. The next call comes into 911 and it's coded as a welfare check. We get lots of welfare checks. This was of a person calling about someone they worked with that day who hadn't shown up to work. It had been a couple of days, and the last time they saw the person at work, they felt that the person didn't seem like themselves, and they were concerned. And so they called 911 to see if someone would go out and check on the person. That day, we dispatched a single officer to the scene. The officer ended up meeting with this person's mother. And the conversation was really about a mother who was concerned about her daughter and was interested in finding out about healthcare options so that she could get her daughter the care that she needed. Exactly the kind of thing that clinicians and peer support specialists and others are prepared to really provide that type of care. And the final one comes into 911, it's coded as a crisis, a mental health crisis. It is from a woman with no known history of violence, but who has called 911 many times in the past, who has a known history of hallucinations. And on this day is calling and afraid that someone is breaking into her apartment through the ceiling of her apartment. On that day, we end up sending 2 officers. They arrive at the scene and the woman will not open the door for them. And they leave a flyer in the door and walk away. And I think all 3 of these are real examples of calls that we believe that sending the right response and providing the care that people need in the moment, that there's even more than we can do. And I say even more because having personally observed many of these calls, I can tell you that our officers showed up, that they brought real genuine concern for the individuals, that they practiced de-escalation. But there are also the calls that clinicians and peer support specialists and others are really well suited to meet the needs of those individuals. Next slide. One thing I'll point out about that list is it doesn't include sending a licensed clinician when shots are fired or when someone when there is an instance of a violent crime. And one of the reasons I say that is to set expectations for tonight. I'm glad that we had some local media coverage of this event, and so that hopefully more people attended. The unfortunate thing is that it was framed in a way that led to the expectation that tonight is about gun violence. That is a very important topic in our community, but tonight is primarily about sending the right response to behavioral health and mental health crises, to quality of life concerns. That's what tonight is about. And I just want to set that expectation. All right, so our goal tonight and our goal in the work of our department right now is focused on what does it mean to connect people to the right care by sending the right response. With a specific focus on what does it mean to connect people to the right care who may be experiencing a mental or behavioral health crisis, who may have unmet other needs. And the goal is really connecting them to care, to meeting them where they're at, to understanding the care that they need and want. We have focused on 3 key moments in our pilots. So what does it mean to do this when someone calls, at the point of a call? What does it mean for in-person responses? And what does it mean to follow up after a moment of crisis to really continue to help connect people to the care they need and want? So we have 4 pilots that we're launching across these 3 key moments that I'm going to describe now. Next slide, please. Crisis call diversion is our first pilot. At the highest level, this means embedding licensed clinicians into our 911 call center. Clinicians will help to triage and assess the needs of calls, especially behavioral health or mental health related calls, suicide threat calls, to be able to better understand the needs of the caller, to be able to respond remotely. Sometimes people call 911 for a whole range of reasons, and they do not all require and need an in-person response. But sometimes we're left with no better option because we don't have the personnel with this kind of training in our call center who could really help understand the needs of someone over the phone and connect them to other community-based care. But it is also the case that even when we send in-person responses, clinicians can be in the call center can be an invaluable resource at really understanding the needs of individuals, of de-escalating situations. We were talking to Austin. Austin is one of the cities in the United States that has a program like this. I believe now they have 18 clinicians in their call center. And they not only divert some calls away from law enforcement, but sometimes, and they told a story of a suicide threat call where the individual had a gun in their hand. And they dispatched law enforcement and EMS, but they put their clinician on the phone in 911. And that clinician was able to talk with the person to de-escalate the situation, have the person put away the weapon prior to other responders arriving on the scene, to communicate this to law enforcement. And that made that situation safer for everyone. And so we think, and we have heard from other communities, whether it be Houston or Austin or Charleston or Philadelphia, who are beginning to do this, that there are many benefits from thinking more expansively about the kinds of personnel that we need in our call center that can really help us in that initial moment, right when someone calls, begin to better understand the needs when a caller is calling about an unmet behavioral health need or quality of life concern, and then to make sure that we're connecting them to the right care and to begin some of that connection at the moment of the phone call. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess we can. So our goals in this are a couple of big goals. One, we can divert some calls away from law enforcement or away from any in-person response by having these type of clinicians who are prepared and able to respond remotely. We can also make better decisions about who to dispatch in a moment when we have licensed clinicians who are able to make these type of assessments. And it just better positions us in that moment of crisis and in the call to be with someone in that moment of crisis and connect them to the care that they need and want. Next slide, please. Before talking about this one thing about the previous, so Houston's been doing this longer than anyone. Houston started back in 2016 with a crisis call Diversion. They're now running it 24/7. They have diverted over 7,400 calls away from law enforcement through this program successfully. And just looking at my notes here for anything else I wanted to share. They have saved law enforcement over 11,000 hours through this. And I think that's an important thing to talk about the benefits of these programs. It allows law enforcement officers to focus in other areas where they're most needed. So there's a lot of benefits that come from these types of approaches. All right, on to our next pilot, community response teams. These are our unarmed response teams. This is the pilot that probably gets the most people thinking and talking about it. The idea that we will begin this summer dispatching three-person teams of unarmed responders to nonviolent behavioral health calls, to quality of life concern calls. The goal of this pilot is to provide rapid trauma-informed care dispatched through 911, just like any other first responder, to nonviolent behavioral health and mental health calls. Our three-person team will include a licensed clinician, a peer support specialist, and an EMT. And each of those roles has a really important role to play in this work. A licensed mental health clinician is able to assess, make an assessment of the therapeutic needs and of the mental health needs of a person and try to help understand the type of care that can support that person in a moment of crisis. A peer support specialist, by that I mean an individual who has real lived experience with the types of calls that we are responding to, who has experienced these types of crises in their life and has gained real expertise and wisdom through that, and then is able to meet someone where they're at, to really connect with someone having walked in their shoes. That we believe that peer support specialists have a really crucial role to play in this work. And then finally an EMT, because there are many things that an EMT might do on this team, from basic wound care to checking someone's blood pressure. But it's also true that sometimes a situation may present itself as a mental health related need, but there are underlying important health needs that we need to be aware of. So having an EMT on the scene, all of these positions together help best position us to meet people where they're at and to provide the care that they need and want. I'm going to talk about a few aspects of this pilot. When we talk about the kinds of calls that we're going to send people to, we're talking about nonviolent mental health calls would get these teams, calls involving suicide threats where there's not a weapon in someone's possession, calls that may involve sex work, calls that may involve persons who are homeless, again, that are often coded trespass, welfare checks, intoxicated person, panhandling or solicitation, verbal disturbances, and public indecency. These are some of the calls that we feel are appropriate for this type of response. And we have gotten to identifying those types of calls through a variety of ways. We've spent time talking with our own first responders here, doing ride-alongs, talking with local behavioral health providers, listening to residents. We have spent time looking at our own data to understand how often assaults occur on these types of calls, which are incredibly rare. We've taken time to learn from other cities who are already doing this work, already sending unarmed responders and showing that it is completely consistent with the safety of those responders and with the safety of others on the scene. All these things have built more and more confidence that these types of calls are appropriate for us for unarmed response teams. These teams will get the calls in a variety of ways. So they will be dispatched through 911, call 911 for a crisis. If that crisis is one of those call types that I mentioned, if a weapon isn't present on the person, then it's possible that one of our unarmed response teams would be dispatched. So just like any other first responder. These teams will also be able to self-initiate calls. So if they're out in the community, if they see someone perhaps on the side of the road in distress, they'll be able to radio into 911 and self-initiate a call. They'll also be able to take referrals from law enforcement. So it may be that other first responders are dispatched to a scene. They arrive on the scene and they realize that this is actually a call where our community responders are really best suited. And they'll be able to radio in, and those will be important things for us to learn from as we try to fine tune the right calls to send our teams to. We've seen from other communities these same types of ways that teams get to calls. And we're excited about having those variety of ways that our teams can connect with residents in a moment of crisis. There's always a lot of conversation when we talk about unarmed responders with the safety of responders. And I just want to say to those in attendance tonight, this is something that we take real seriously, something that we have spent a lot of time learning about, planning for, that we have continued confidence the longer that we plan, that the work that we're doing is work that is consistent with the safety of everyone on the scene, and that we're putting good plans in place that prepare for unpredictable situations, because situations are unpredictable. Some of the safety mechanisms we have in place is our teams will have exclusion criteria, which means that even if it's an eligible call, if a weapon is present, then that call won't qualify for an unarmed response when we begin. All of our teams will be visible to 911, so we will know where they're at. They will have, which is an important safety mechanism. They will have radios, so they'll be able to communicate. And then we have also taken time again to learn from other cities. And what we see in cities that have been doing this work, Denver's responded to 1,700 calls over the last year. Similar types of calls. Their top calls are trespasses and welfare checks. They have radioed for police backup 0 times. We have learned from San Francisco and Eugene that have a higher volume of calls. And even there, it's very rare. About 2% of their calls, they radio for backup. But what we have learned from that is because they have taken the right steps, because they have carefully planned, when they radio for backup, it doesn't lead to violence. It doesn't lead to assaults. It just brings in the right responder in that moment to help with the situation. All these things are very encouraging and things that we're taking time again to carefully plan with other public safety partners. We're also committed to training, and I know we'll talk more about training tonight, the types of training you hope to see for these responders. But before our teams are in the field, there'll be an intensive month of training and preparation around situational safety and awareness and a whole range of other things, trauma-informed care, and a variety of other things that we think and feel are really important, racial equity training. Next slide, please. And if this is the next slide, one more slide, apologies. All right, our third pilot is co-response. Co-response is pairing a clinician and eventually a peer support specialist with a CIT trained officer. This is specifically for calls that may have a mental or behavioral health component or need, but there is a heightened risk factor. So maybe a weapon is present. So a suicide threat where the person has a weapon in their hand would get ideally a co-response, a CIT trained officer to assist with safety on the scene, but also this other team to support de-escalation, to really understand the individual's needs, to help support harm reduction on scene. So this is something that we'll be piloting as well this summer, again, for higher risk calls where, because of some of the factors, that we're also taking on different calls with our co-response team, including family disturbances, certain types of physical disturbance. And we'll be evaluating each of these pilots on their efficacy and always considering where the right boundaries for call types are. It may be that some calls that start in co-response ultimately move to unarmed response. And it may be that we learn through unarmed response that some of those calls are best suited by a co-response. That's why it's important that we begin this work in this pilot mindset of really being intentional about learning and being transparent about what's working and what's not, and then refining our design of each of these important new service deliveries. Next slide. And next slide. Our final pilot is Care Navigators. Care Navigators are follow-up care. One of the things that we've heard consistently in our previous town halls and our community listening sessions and work sessions has been the importance of follow-up care, of meeting people after a moment of crisis. It's not just about showing up at the moment of crisis, but it's in the days that follow. And so our Care Navigator pilot is providing dedicated staff that meet people after a moment of crisis within 48 hours to have a follow-up visit with a peer support specialist, community health worker, a licensed clinician. And the goal of that is to help connect people to the care that they need and want. And not only individuals who may have been the ones experiencing the crisis, but also their loved ones and their family members. I think that's another thing that has really stood out through our listening sessions and through our previous town hall, is that follow-up needs to happen and needs to also center the whole family and other individuals who care for individuals who may have been experiencing crisis. The goal in this is not long-time case management, but it's being more of a connective tissue of really understanding the person's needs and trying to connect them to the community-based care that they need and want, trying to resolve as many issues as we can in community. These are some of the core principles of care navigation. So we're envisioning two-person teams when they're following up in person. So a clinician paired with either a community health worker or a peer support specialist. And again, meeting within their first visit within 48 hours after an encounter with one of our crisis response teams. And then it may be continuing through multiple visits to help get people connected, a warm handoff to the community-based care that they need and want. Always keeping a harm reduction, trauma-informed approach of meeting people, again, where they're at with the care they want and are ready to receive. Okay, next slide, please. One of the examples of care navigation comes from San Francisco. San Francisco has unarmed responder teams, and they have added to that what they call an Office of Coordinated Care, very similar design, pairing clinicians and community health workers around providing, connecting within 24 hours after an encounter to help get people connected up to the care that they need and want. One thing I failed to say about the previous pilot co-response that I'll say briefly is, one thing about that model is the CIT officers will be in the Durham Police Department, but the clinicians and the peer support specialists will be in the Community Safety Department. It will be a joint response. And we see that working really, really well right now in Greensboro, which recently this past year hired 6 clinicians that are operating out of their Office of Equity and Inclusion in a joint response with the Greensboro Police Department. Durham will be the first city in North Carolina to have unarmed responders, but there are some other cities that are actively working on co-response. And I just wanted to name Greensboro as one model that we have been learning from. Okay, next slide. All right, what to expect in terms of timeline. So we actually we are putting out offers now, filling up some of our crisis response teams in terms of clinicians and peer support specialists. We hope to have all of our team members on board and trained by the end of June, and including end of training, launching pilots at the end of June or into the month of July. These pilots we want to be really transparent. This is not our last town hall. We want to be in communities, learning from individuals' experience and encounters with our responders, continuing to shape and refine the way that these services are delivered to meet the needs of residents. That will be ongoing. We're going to be transparent in sharing data about what's working and what's not. We'll be reporting out monthly results, a whole range of things. And we want to learn more tonight about some of the things that you want to be hearing from us regularly, what really matters to you. We hope that we'll be able to increase staffing to have more robust pilots as we head into the summer and fall. And we're committed to rigorous evaluation of these pilots. And when I say that, I mean knowing what works and what doesn't, being real and transparent about it, and then using that to inform next steps. That's work that'll happen over the first 6 months of our pilots. We'll also be working with some third-party partners, UNC's Center for Health Equity Research, RTI. I'm sure we'll continue to work with our task force on evaluating these pilots so that we can continue to refine them. We are not operating under belief that we get it all right out the door. There are important things that we want to get right, that are important to get right, but we're not going to get it all right. And we need all of us together to figure that out. What are the ways that we need to continue to shape and refine these models so that we have a type of response that is meeting the important needs for which it was created. The last thing I'll say is these pilots aren't going to operate 24/7. And with the exception of crisis call diversion, they're not going to operate citywide because we don't have staffing sufficient to do that to begin. As we get closer to pilot launch, we'll be providing a lot more details about where teams will be operating. All of that will come in the coming weeks. But that's an important note, and that these pilots, as we demonstrate what's working, we'll be seeking additional resources so that we can grow them citywide and eventually 24/7. But first, we have to show that they work. And I think that concludes my comments. So I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation with you all. Thank you for the time tonight and for your participation in the next hour and a half.
See that several questions came up for Ryan while you were presenting, and I know that the Community Safety Department is tracking those questions. Ryan, how will folks learn the answers to these questions? Do you think we'll receive them in the chat, or should we save them for the discussion at the end?
We can take some of them in discussion at the end. We may be able to respond to some in the chat as we go. And any that we don't, we'll track, and we'll prepare, I'm sure, a report out from this task force in which we can answer any unanswered questions then as well. Does that sound okay?
Yes, and I'll just add to Ryan that our Assistant Director, Annie Spence, has been responding to the questions in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thanks to everybody in the new Community Safety Department. You can use your Zoom reactions to share your applause and gratitude for all the amazing work that's been happening so far over the last 8 months. We're really excited, and thanks to all of the folks inside of city government who've been supporting this important unfolding. I'm gonna share my screen and pop over to the group poll and invite you to, in a separate browser window, type in menti.com, MENTI.com, and an opportunity will pop up to type in a number. That number is going to be 1665-4438. It's also visible on your screen right now. Go to menti.com and type in 1665-4438. And you're going to get the opportunity to answer 2 questions. Which pilots are you most excited by of the pilots that the Community Safety Department will be beginning with? And what do you wish was happening? What did you not see represented in the work that is going to be unfolded at the start? Ryan, do you mind just reminding us the 4 categories of work you described? It will also pop up as options in the drop-down menu when people go into their Menti.
Sure, the 4 pilots are crisis call diversion, that's putting clinicians in the call center. Our unarmed response teams we call them our community responder teams. That's the 3-person unarmed teams. Co-response, which is pairing our clinicians and peer support with CIT trained officers, and then care navigation, which is about follow-up after a crisis.
If anyone has questions that you need answered in order to answer these 2 questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Which pilots are you most excited by? And what do you wish was here? This is not a quiz to check if you were listening. This is really about being very eager to know what resonates most about these pilots for Durham residents, and what are Durham residents hungry to see that isn't yet reflected in these array of pilots. So bring it, bring your thoughts, bring your feelings, bring your visions. And I'll pass it to you, Shannon, if you want to share results. Oh, great. Just received an excellent question. How do I go to menti.com? So if you just open a browser, so maybe you use Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or Firefox or some other place where you go look at the internet, you're going to open that and you're going to type in menti.com in the place where you put in websites. And when you go to menti.com, you'll be asked to put in a number. And that number is going to be 1665-4438. And what that does is it lets you into a poll which asks you which pilots are you most excited about, and you're going to drop down and choose the ones you're most excited about. And folks are already populating the Menti with their answers. Thanks, Ruby. Ruby just added the link to go to menti.com. If you click there, it'll pop open, and then you can put in the number 1665-4438. And we're seeing the most enthusiasm so far around community response teams, which are the teams of unarmed community responders. Second, the crisis call Diversion, which would be clinicians embedded in our 911 call response center. Then care navigators, the follow-up work. And finally, Coresponse, community responders who are paired with police. What did we see was missing from the pilots? We'd like to see more funding for teams. You all are incredible. That sounds good. Nothing else at this time. Persons trained with bicultural backgrounds. More funding for additional teams to be in the community diverting participants. Would like to see more unarmed would like to see more unarmed response teams, fully funded, proven response teams that can cover the whole community. I hope the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force becomes fully funded by the city. I am very happy and excited about the process thus far. Definitely grow into 24/7 care and coverage. Would like to see funding and resources to be able to staff these pilots at the same level of the current first responders. I really want to see these pilots succeed, and this will be made more possible if the community safety department is staffed at a high level. And just for context, currently 30 cents of every dollar that goes into our general fund is spent on policing. So someone is saying, wow, it would be amazing to see community care response that is at that scale. Program evaluation plans, how will the program be measured and how do you define success? Would like more clarity around that. Initial metrics or goals should be created to use as benchmarks. I sincerely believe that these programs will show less need for armed police services and more need for community-focused services such as these. I wish there was representation from law enforcement on the call to share their perspective. I believe there is actually law enforcement on this call, and if you are from anywhere in the Durham law enforcement systems, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat so that we can respond to this person's comment about wishing there was that representation. The main thought I had was that I wish we had funding for bigger pilots, more than one team, because I'm sure they're going to be so helpful. Right now, I do not feel like anything is missing. Permanent part of the responses to crises in Durham, and seeing this grow and have more than 3 to 5 pilots and having these 24/7. Not sure what cultural aspects have been considered in terms of the makeup of these teams. Are they racially diverse? And want to pause for a second after these in case community safety department folks want to answer some of the direct questions here. Direct and specific attention to child and family support, decriminalize parenting and poverty under capitalism through addiction, abuse, and complete overwhelm. I wish there were additional alternatives to active situations that are violent. The approach to these alternatives suggesting that they help free up law enforcement, frankly, is a bit disturbing. We can do better than police. This isn't necessarily a first responder pilot, but would really appreciate more infrastructures of care around our city and county, such as wellness centers with free counseling services, resources for housing, etc. It is important to be transparent about who will be receiving the referrals. They must be vetted in some detailed way. Would love to know more details about how locations for the pilot areas were figured out, how unarmed crisis response teams will be selected and trained. At least one bilingual responder in each team. Will this pilot program involve minors? I wish that law enforcement was a part of this discussion, as I think they would bring a unique perspective to this meeting. How are you going to assist with connecting individuals to follow-up services not related to mental or trauma issues? Follow-up method to decrease reoccurrences. More funding. The way we can reduce armed response of any kind, the better. There must be transparency in who receives the referrals. The legs must be vetted. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. If someone knows, please feel free to hop off mute. And what is that? The legs must be vetted. Sorry. I would like to see more social workers and community workers in leadership positions over law enforcement. This is a great start with a nice short trial period. Summer will be perfect to trial this. Removal of officers with weapons and cuffs. A bigger initial launch of the pilots to cover a wide range of communities, more funding for community safety and less for armed officers. Feedback from current responders or their expected vision for partnering, wondering how they're receiving the partnership and anticipated impacts, additional budget details and confirmed to ensure longevity and that it is not just a pilot. Long-term investment in staffing unarmed response teams. Is the county in sync with the Community Wellness Task Force? And I see that there's folks from the Board of County Commissioners present. If anyone wants to answer that question, please feel free. As a CERT volunteer, would like to see some collaboration training so that CERT volunteers could request a response team for emergencies. More funding for the community safety response, more education about alternatives to policing. I would like to see input and feedback from law enforcement officers. My experience with having someone involuntary and involuntarily commuted had armed police officers arrive and handcuff the individual to take them to Durham access. Would love a pilot that would address this, not using armed police officers for transport. More unarmed teams meeting individuals where they are with a follow-up, and begin to see the improvement with the action of the community response team, modeling more compassion and genuine approach surrounding the current situation at hand. Representation from law enforcement and smooth collaboration with them. More resources for programs that can help people before they reach a crisis stage. For example, healthcare, housing, education, mental health, healthy food, more community connection. In what way is the Office of the County Sheriff and its staff brought into the pilot launches? Decriminalizing drug users, sex workers, and poverty. Publicizing this service. So few people are aware of these incredible transformative efforts. Community safety and wellness begins with ending poverty in our city. How is that being considered in these pilot implementations? What are protocols for minors? How will we deal with full beds at our shelters, facilities, and treatment centers? I worry that those that get deployed will end up in an escalated situation. Agree that law enforcement should have a voice in this. Is there someone on the teams representing child advocacy? What local agencies will they collaborate with? We need to convey a welcoming community, signage, referral numbers. How can I help? Billboards around town, notices on buses, in church bulletins, public housing lobbies, cross-cultural understanding to bring the high wealth communities in sync. A plan to broadly promote the unarmed response teams across Durham so that people know it's available, maybe a 3-digit call number.
There was a lot of
Incredible
amazing
what
stuff there.
brilliance.
That was wonderful.
Yes.
There was so much there, but we could spend the rest of the night just talking about that list. One thing that I want to commit on behalf of our department is that we will get all of these comments back, and we will provide something that we will circulate back. If you signed up tonight and gave your email, we can share it back that way. We'll respond to those points. I appreciate, in general, what I heard was some enthusiasm and excitement for some of the stuff we're doing. Some people who had some concerns about some things that we were doing, and I appreciate people pushing back on various aspects or sharing their concerns. I heard questions about who's involved and who's not, and so we can be transparent. We will, as part of our lead up to this, and we're continuing to raise awareness about it, we'll not only talk about the areas that we're going to be working in, but how they've been selected. We haven't completely finalized that list, which is why we're not talking about it tonight, but we'll talk about that, talk about how we have arrived at that. Again, we're limited in part by how many teams. We have 2 teams available to start, not one, just on unarmed response. And that just limits how much we can't cover citywide that way. And we need to be real about what we can cover. And so we're trying to use, we'll talk more about that and everything, and stuff coming up. But I really appreciate all the questions, the ideas, and you have our commitment as a department that we will really honor the time that you took right then just to share a whole bunch of feedback, and we'll respond to it.
I'm also seeing in the chat a response from county commissioners affirming the county's commitment to this work, and want to lift up how the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force works. Or maybe actually, shall I punt it back to you, Xavier, if you want to just explain the 3 municipal bodies and who the task force is appointed by and all that?
Sure. It's one of the more unique ways we've put task force together here in Durham, where we have persons who are appointed by the county commissioners, appointed by the city council members, and appointed by the Board of Education members, 5 from each body. And then 2 of the 2 co-chairs were brought in by the chairs of those 3 committees. So there's 17 appointees. And so therefore there's 1 liaison from each of the appointed, from the elected bodies, that is actually sitting in with all of the committee meetings as well. So when the task force comes together, we have a commissioner, a school board member, and a city council member who's present with us at the time as well.
Now we're going to be opening breakout rooms.
before we
we're
go,
able to
just
see the
one final thing I'd say is, I know there were questions about has law enforcement been involved and have Durham County been involved? And I just want to say, yes, a lot of people have been involved. Chief Andrews, other folks in law enforcement have weighed in on these plans and have been a part of some of our planning meetings. Durham County folks have also been involved in some of our meetings, and a lot of other people have been involved, but I know there were specific comments about that. So I just wanted to name those partners, and there are important partners that I'm not naming tonight because a lot of people have been involved in this.
So this is the part where we really dig into the gritty details of what Durham residents will be able to access through the work of the Community Safety Department. And so we're really asking every single person in this room to choose the breakout that you feel most called to, and consider it a co-design space, like the charrettes that have been such an important part of creating racial justice realities here in Durham. We're leaning into that legacy of community members co-designing the kind of future we want to see in Durham. So in that spirit and with that reverence for the path that has been made for us, let's choose a breakout room that you feel called to. If you feel comfortable starting your video, if you've been off video and feel comfortable showing your face to your fellow participants, and if you're bringing in a really heavy institutional hat or a heavy organizational hat, you might want to lift off that hat and just center in your body as a Durham resident and think about what really true safety and wellness looks like in your neighborhood and for your family and among your friends and loved ones, and bring that to the table. So these are the topics. And if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little pop-up bar that offers the option for breakout rooms, and you get to choose which breakout room you want to be in. Would you like to join training and evaluation, room 1? Personnel and approach, room 2. Supplies and appearance, room 3. Call types, transport and follow-up, room 4. If you don't understand how to join a breakout room, but you want to, go ahead and say in the chat which one you want to be moved to, and one of our co-hosts can migrate you there manually. In those breakout rooms, there will be facilitators, and there will be interpreters, and we'll have about 30 minutes in those spaces. So let's share that time with care and consideration.
Would it be possible to say a little bit more about each breakout room group?
Yeah, absolutely. So training, actually, may I pass it to you, Shannon, to share a little bit more about what's
Shannon is already in. Shannon is already.
Oh, sorry, Dwayne, do you want to?
Sure, but Shannon is already in the breakout room. But training and evaluation is essentially how we're preparing staff and also assessing the efficacy and improvement of each pilot. Personnel and approach, again, is around our staff and how we're going about preparing our staff, as well as putting together these pilots. Supplies, what apparatus are needed to make sure that these pilots are operating properly, and what do you want these individuals who are working in the community or on our team to look like? Do you want them to be wearing uniform? If yes, what should uniform look like? If no, how should they dress? Should they present an ID, wear a badge? what exactly do you want from each of these individuals? Call types are really, what are the calls that our team members who will be out in the community will be responding to? So everybody else could just feel free to join. Jennifer, are you going to stay in the main room? Okay.
I'm going. I'll see you there, Manji.
And if there's any other question for me, I could answer them here, or you could just go to the room that you think suits your interest best. I could also assign you into a room if you prefer.
I don't see the breakout room invite thing. The icon went away.
What group and who is speaking, please? Katrina?
Katrina Swan.
And Katrina, what room would you want to go in, please?
4.
Katrina.
Thank you.
No worries. 4. Thank you. Sorry, anybody else would like me to put them into a room? Sandy, Annie, would you like me to put you into a room, or you have a room of preference? Okay, I'll just assign it to one then.
Oh, I would love 4, please.
Which one?
4? Sorry,
Oh,
just
no worries, no worries.
Acknowledge it and sorry, we didn't have a chance to acknowledge it in breakout room number 1, but the last question we asked was basically a masterclass in program and implementation evaluation. So if anyone is ever being like, I should study how implementation science works, look at those answers and you'll be like 80% of the way there. It's really good stuff came out of it.
Yeah, so juicy and really generous, all of you, to bring your expertise to the table in all of its forms.
Yeah. Well, first coming back, I also want to say every time we plan these, I'm like, whew, 2 hours. All right, like, pack a lunch, we're going to do it. And then by the time we come to the end, I'm like, we have no time. I want to talk to everybody. I'm just really grateful that everyone's here. And I want to acknowledge everyone who spoke and everyone who feels like they haven't had a chance to speak, and everyone who has been listening or who feels all 3 things at the same time.
We're about to do a lightning round of report backs, passing the mic to a representative from training and evaluation, group 1, who will summarize in less than a minute some of the highlights of the conversation.
Right. Well, I so I can hop in and anyone talk over me. If you want to talk over me, that's fine. So the big question we had is, what types of training should people have, and how will we know if this is working? Like, if these pilots are going great, what does great look like, and how do we know? Folks had insights like that it's so hard to find good mental health services for folks who are in need. People who are at low barrier touch points in the city already struggle to make those connections or even find them. We had folks saying that they have a lot of they're personally impacted by gun violence in Durham, and are very interested in training, education, opportunities to be involved as a citizen, not just as someone receiving services from these. In terms of training, I would say de-escalation, and although no one used this term, trauma-informed care is something that kind of came to the top of, anti-carceral, person-centered, community goals first, as opposed to telling people what their problem is and how to fix it. And when it comes to how to know what's working, we had lots of great suggestions about, how many youth are being diverted, how many calls are being diverted, different quantitative things. But more than anything, the most common thing lifted up was simply asking people, is this working for you? If you received this service, would you like to receive this service the second time if a similar or the same event emerged in your life? And I think that is really, really fabulous. That doesn't do justice to everything we talked about, but that's my short version.
Amazing work, training and evaluation. Now let's hear from Group 2, personnel and approach. Do we have a volunteer willing to share back a lightning 1 minute or less summary?
So I can provide a summary, but if any of the participants from our room feel called to share, I would love for you to speak and share from our group as well. So I'll go ahead, but feel free to jump in with anything that I miss. So we were focused on the personnel and approach. So the things that people wanted to see, like, again, reinforcement of people without weapons, people who have that skills in de-escalation, conflict, transformation, mediation, people who can show up without stigma, people who can show up for people who are neurodivergent or differently abled, peer specialists. We kind of dived into that a little bit and talked about the importance of lived experience in a variety of things, lived experience with addiction, being unhoused, having mental illness. And then several people talked about the importance of having a bilingual interpreter. Even if someone can speak English well, having someone there who can speak in Spanish or can speak fluently with that person in a moment of crisis being something that's really important. And then the other question we talked through was, what kind of things do responders say and do to help de-escalate a situation? A lot of people emphasized a kind of calm approach, but also, kind of keeping your arms down, introducing yourself, but also communicating non-verbally as well as verbally, of, not swarming in, not surrounding someone. We talked about some of the bad situations that people have experienced or heard about from police response, of being put into the back of vehicles when they're in the middle of a crisis, and feeling like they are or actually being transported to jail. Not giving commands or shouting, having that humility, giving people grace, even if they have a criminal record, giving someone power in that situation. And also we talked about involving the family members and the friends that are around. So not just responding directly to that person, but creating community and care and sort of the group that is a process of that situation, and explaining the process to family members. I also want to note that one thing that I think we were able at the end to kind of jump to some of the other questions, and I thought of when Jennifer was talking about evaluation, that one of the things that emerged from our evaluation discussion was seeing if people are repeatedly going through the sort of same crisis, that what we would like to see is not just that someone is served in that moment of crisis, but that moment of crisis can help them heal and transform and be in a better situation where hopefully they don't need to rely on that crisis service again. So that being a sort of measure of how they would feel that they knew that these pilots were working. So again, I would love for others to put in the chat anything that stood out to them that I missed, but that's our lightning overview.
Gorgeous, Rose. Passing it to supplies and appearance, Group 3.
I'll also open it to any other resident here who may want to share out from Group 3. In the interest of time, I'll move on. But we did have some very good responses as expected. We had people suggesting that we should have phone chargers, we should have cigarette or a nicotine replacement available, talking about or responders having something to show their legitimacy in the field and doing the work. somebody said in times of crisis, staff members need to be noticed in moments of crisis. Knowing someone other than the police will help them to build that trust faster. With regard to what these responders would look like, there was a unanimous no to red and no black on black outfit even, because of what that may represent. There's a suggestion that there should be soothing colors, somewhat like light blue or blue that the nurses wear in hospital. At the same time, there was a discussion for there to be something like a reflector orange for visibility. So I think there was some consensus with using either reflector orange or silver on a t-shirt, because the time of day will matter. So if it's at nighttime, you want these individuals to be visible. And somebody hypothesized that most of the work would be done at nighttime. So this reflector, whether it's the orange or the silver, should be very important. Residents spoke about the importance of the fabric, that it must be breathing fabric that allows comfort. We did not, the residents did not have a consensus on the pants. Some people thought or outreach teams should have the option to wear their own pants, whether they're comfortable with. Others thought, they should be given pants by the department because that's an important part of their work. And somebody said, we should not have all the outreach individuals wearing the same thing. They can wear the same t-shirts, but maintain their own unique dress, I guess. If there's anybody else who has anything to add from group 3, you're welcome to do so.
I do want to add that it felt like a really good conversation, and definitely had an intergenerational aspect to it that I loved. And yeah, I think we were trying to balance kind of like respectability, politics, like, and not playing into that, and like allowing folks to be approached by folks who they felt by like appearance were relatable and personable, and that would really understand what they were going through, versus some of the perceptions that we have when we're approached by folks in uniform, no matter what that uniform is. But yeah, it was just an overall good conversation, and I was happy to be in the fashion group.
And no polyester or rayon.
Incredible work. And I love that folks who weren't part of that group are enthusiastic to help answer the question or have questions about what happened in that conversation. I want to just again share the 4 topics of the groups. If there was a topic that you couldn't be in because you just couldn't clone yourself into 2 breakouts at once, I feel you're suffering. I wanted to be in all 4 groups. Please feel free to share your thoughts, and maybe someone from the community safety department could put in an email address that people could send their ideas for the other 3 topics. And we'll thanks so much to supplies and appearance. That was incredible. And we'll pass it to call types, transport, and follow-up.
So I'll get it started, and then if anyone else from the group wants to add on something I missed, feel free. I want to let Shannon know that you won't see a lot in the Menti because this was a talking group, and they talked more in chat than we did out in the open. So I copied a lot of the chat into the notes for you. Our 2 questions were, what kinds of situations should we respond to? And the second question was, where would you like teams to be able to transport people to? Mental health took up a lot of the conversation, particularly times where someone may come to respond to a mental health crisis, but doesn't actually observe any behaviors that are different or of concern, and how difficult that is. Very complex comments on mental health. We talked about how the response should be timeliness is important in the response. There was an acknowledgement in the chat. We didn't talk about this, but the chat, there was an acknowledgement that there's no one size that fits all for every situation. And we really need to think about the training, be aware of potential biases in how calls are being labeled, that we don't have enough facilities to handle every situation, but that this is a great start. And on the other hand, we don't want to keep sending people from one resource to another, which happens in many cases. We over rely on our jails and the hospitals. We want to be able to send our residents to places where they can actually get service outside of the jails and the hospitals. And those are some of the main things I saw as I was taking notes. Anyone else think something that was really powerful that stood out to you in group 4?
One idea that came up, and then there were multiple, but one that stood out to me, Xavier, was the idea about either providing bus passes and or taking people to the bus station if they needed to get to places that were outside of our, if there were places that we weren't going to transport individuals to, but to get them to a place where they could and provide a means for them to use that form of public transportation. I thought that was a really good idea. I just wanted to lift up. Thank you, Jan. I believe it was yours.
Right. I mean, Ryan, go ahead and mention about the protocol with the 911 call, about making a call, real quicker.
Oh, sure. So one of the questions that came up that I responded to is how will these teams get sent to calls? And so the one thing that I shared that may be helpful for others is just how it works right now. So if you call 911, a call taker answers the phone. That call taker has a set of questions, like prescribed questions that they ask. And those questions vary based on how you begin to answer the questions. And so they go through this automatic list of questions. And at the end of that list of questions, there is a call nature, like what kind of call is this that is assigned to that call? And then units, a type of response is recommended based on that call nature. And what I shared when Mr. Chestnut asked that question is, we're going to be using that system. And there are some benefits of that, which is we're not relying on the discretion of call takers or on training call takers to get used to a whole new type of response. We choose the type of calls that are eligible. And when someone answers, when a person is answering a question that the call takers ask, if it is that call nature, then an unarmed response would be recommended. When I can tell you in talking with some other cities that aren't going this way, that it can take them a long time to get their call volume up because it takes time to change behavior and recognize what's eligible and what's not. So there's some real benefits to that, but that's also why it's taken us some time to launch, because doing that work is a little tedious. And we're lucky to have some people who are really dedicating a lot of time to get that right. So anyway, thanks. I think I spoke to what you wanted, Mr. Chestnut, but thank you for that question.
Dr. Dwayne Campbell, will you take us home?
Thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. We truly appreciate you continuing to contribute to Durham's safety and wellness. The Durham Community Safety Department, as well as the Community Safety Task Force, is always interested in learning more about how we can improve our work and ensuring that we are properly serving you, the residents in Durham. We know you sacrificed your time to come here this afternoon, and we truly honor that and we lift that up. For those of you who requested the $25 incentive, we'll be sending that to you in the mail if you had provided your home address. For those of you who had provided your telephone number, we'll be calling you just to arrange how you'll receive that. We will also ask that you complete the Survey Monkey, the survey that is, the link is in the chat. My colleague Shannon just placed it there. We also welcome you to email us at any time, whether through the task force or department. I want to say special thanks to the Community Safety Department for their great work in doing lots of real research and following the data in ensuring that we serve Durham's residents, especially in their times of crisis. I especially want to thank our department's director, Ryan, and assistant director, Annie Spence. At the same time, and of equal importance, I want to thank all the members of the Community Safety and the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force, especially those who are a part of the Crisis Response Roundtable, Responders Roundtable. You've been doing an amazing job. We thank you as a department for your continuous collaboration with us. You hold us accountable and you continue to walk with us, and we're continuing to rely on you for your expertise and your support. Thank you everyone for spending your evening with us, and we will hear from you, and we hope you will listen out to hear more from us. Have a great evening.
Xavier and Ryan, we're going to close us out.
I'm sorry, you wanted more comment?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dwayne said it all. I mean, it's always great to be in community. I'm loving what's in the chat coming in. I also want to just thank Jennifer, Manju, Isak in his absence, Shanice, the members of the Crisis Roundtable who are just we meet weekly, and they put in a lot of time and effort into putting these together. And so I'm very glad to be in their presence always. Ryan?
I'll just shout out also Rose, who's a member of that roundtable. Dwayne said it so well. Let me just end by saying we are excited about launching these pilots. And what I want you to hear from me and from our department is that's not the end of community engagement. That's a real opportunity to double down and continue to learn more and continue to work closely with communities where we're operating, continue to improve and learn from and change what needs to be changed. And we're committed to doing that work in community. So this is not the last you'll hear from us. There's going to be many, many more opportunities to continue to shape this work. And we're grateful for this space that our task force has created, for the opportunity to continue to work with them and others. So thank you again for your time, and we look forward to the months ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. That's the last goodbye now.